Anyway, here we are, and I'm so happy everybody's here. So we get to do this. So we're on the 8th letter tonight, starting it. And this letter is concerning the wandering mind or wandering thoughts during prayer. So what a great letter, because everybody, always, anytime we have a conversation about meditation, anytime we have any lectures on practice of the presence, that's the first thing. Every single time we get together, somebody will say, oh, but my mind, I can't quiet my mind. I can't be still. I can't do whatever. And, it's true. All of us, I mean, every one of us, all the swamis that I know, we all complain about the same thing. And, the longer that you meditate, I'm pretty sure that this is a common experience. It's that the longer you meditate, the more subtly aware you become. And so even though your mind may, in fact, be much more quiet than it was 25 years ago, you're still now so much more sensitive on the inside that your experience of your mind is still just a big bundle of, jumping grasshoppers. And that's the nature of this beast. And it's not so much control of it that's important, but establishing that identity of separate from it that's important. The ability to let it go on and do whatever it's doing and just treat it like a 2-year-old in the other room. You just shut the door, you hear the noise, you know it's going on, but you're not paying attention to it. You're not grabbing the thoughts and identifying with them and then contemplating them and then reasoning with them and then getting caught up in the whole cycle of thought, which is what our trouble is all the time. So he starts on with this letter. He says, "You tell me nothing new. You are not the only one that is troubled with wandering thoughts." So that's a nice thing. There's our new response. If anybody complains about wandering minds, you'll just say, look, you're not telling me anything new. You're not the only one that is troubled with wandering thoughts. Our mind is extremely roving, but as the will is mistress of our faculties, she must recall them and carry them to God as their last end. So here's his solution. Our mind is extremely roving, but as the will is the mistress of all of our faculties, she must recall them. So the will has to be strengthened, has to go and recall, herd in all of these disparate thoughts, all of these disparate attentions that we have, and put them at the feet of God as their last end. So you see, she doesn't kill them off. She doesn't silence them. She doesn't disturb them. What does she do? The will brings all of this noise and just sets it down in front of God, in the presence of God. And then you sit there with the beloved and enjoy each other's company and watch the toddler of the mind romp about. And your thinking becomes not about the content of the mind, but the content of the mind as it's relating to God, the content of the mind as it is in the presence of the divine. So that awareness of the presence becomes the overwhelming experience and not the thoughts themselves. He says, when the mind, for want of being sufficiently reduced by recollection at our first engaging in devotion, has contracted certain bad habits of wandering and dissipation, they are difficult to overcome and commonly draw us, even against our will, to the things of the earth, right? So this is the problem. This is the danger of mind. Mother says that mind naturally goes down. And that is a surprising thing to see and a disappointing thing to see in ourselves. I remember when I was a young brahmachari, getting up and leaving the shrine one day because I was so ashamed of what I kept. Certainly early on, I would have these times where I would just get absorbed in thinking nonsense and then come to awareness and realize what I was sitting there thinking about, and I was in the shrine and I was so embarrassed. I was like, my gosh, Thakur slapped a woman for something significantly less than this. If he was in the mood to slap somebody, he'd knock me right out the window right now. So I got up and went out the window and called one of my friends who was a devotee and told him, I says, I can't meditate. I can't even go into the shrine. This mind, I'm embarrassed by just where it goes and what it thinks about, even when I'm not aware of it. So we're not in charge. Even if we have willpower, we're not in charge of the mind. The mind's just going on. Because the mind, interestingly enough, is just an organ of thought. We often think it's us. These are our thoughts, our ideas. But if they were, we would have control over them. We could do what we wanted to do with them. But when it was brought up, I don't remember where it was first said to me, but at one point, where you cannot have an original thought in the mind. Every thought is directly related to the previous thought. And every thought determines the following thought. So the mind is an organ of thought. It excretes thought in the same way that your armpits excrete sweat, for a lovely idea. It's just an organ of the body that secretes thought. It's not indicative of you in any way. It just goes on doing it. And if you can look at the mind knowing that, then you can become less interested in the mind knowing that. And the less interested you are, the more quiet the mind becomes, because the mind dances for your attention. And if you remove your attention, the mind begins to quiet. Just like you begin to, you stop sweating when you sit down and stop exercising. So it's kind of the same with the mind. So even though we want these things, we don't seem to be able to do them, not because we're weak, but because we are not the mind, and the mind is just an organ excreting thought one after the other, related all to each other based on past experience, past habits, past whatnots. And so what we have to do is gather the presence of God into our awareness, sit in the presence of God, and together with the beloved, with the divine, observe the mind and let it come and let it go. Don't attach or identify with anything in there. And by that meaning, when I say don't identify with mind, I mean don't look at any thought as being your thought. Just look at it as being a thought. If it's helpful, imagine that you're seeing the thoughts on a television screen. That's one of the pieces of one of the advice I got one time on how not to get drawn into other people's karma. If someone's a really angry person and they're always yelling at you and your feelings are getting hurt, and you're wondering, what am I doing? What did I do? How can I fix this? Better when you're around that person, just put their face on a TV screen, because we're very trained with television. We only get pulled in when we want to. Otherwise, we just know that it's the TV. It just does what it does. And so by putting people into television screens as you talk to them, if they're a difficult kind of person or an offensive kind of person, that's one way of training your mind not to accept all the gifts, all of the anger, all of the whatever they're coming at you with. And so you can do the same with your thoughts. Put them into a radio or put them into a TV in your mind. And then you understand, this is just stuff going on. I don't have to be a part of it. I don't have to be caught up in it. And you sit there with the mother and watching the TV of the mind, as it were. He says, I believe one remedy for this constant wandering and dissipation of the mind, is to confess our faults and to humble ourselves before God. Right? And so what are you going to be doing when you're sitting there with the mother? You're going to be saying, look at that stuff in the mind, Ma. Look at it all. See it all. Put it all there. And the important thing about doing that, the reason that is effective is because having yourself in the presence of God and watching the mind, you have the idea of mind as separate from you. And in your conversation with mother, you can talk about the mind and its contents in third person. So you don't have to sit there and own it. You don't have to sit there. Your confession isn't, I'm such a bad person. I'm so impure. I'm so wrong. Your confession is, look at the condition of this mind that I'm tied to, mother. Hafiz has a wonderful poem about our minds that it's like us being tied to the tail end of a farting camel to cross the desert. It's, I'm so childish in that way, but I get a big hoot out of things like that. And so you can sit there with Mother and talk about the farting mind as a third party. So you don't have to get involved emotionally about it. You can see it as something separate from yourself. You can show Mother something separate from yourself. And really, well, I learned something one time in a practice doing this exactly, was that I was sitting there and I was looking at my mind, which, there it is in your hand. You're like, okay, here's my mind. And you're talking about its contents, and you're confessing the contents to it and sharing about it with her. And I remember I was so exasperated from, 50 years of living with this mind. I told Mother, I says, Ma, if this was your mind, you'd have the same problem that I do. And I always in my imagination, I just saw Mother nudge me in the shoulder, like, yes, you see what you just said? Go back and say that again. Think about what you just said, because you just said a truth accidentally. You are, in fact, I am, in fact, you with your mind. There isn't three of us here. There's really just two of us, me and your mind. But you are an ego. Your identity of self as an ego, you think you exist, and you think that I would be like you if I had your mind. But in fact, I am you when I look through your mind, when I attach and identify with your mind. So that divine spirit, the Mother herself, is actually the real you of you. And she is, in fact, you when she looks through your mind and attaches to it. She gives birth to ego, which bears your name, right? So it's a very beautiful line of thought, and it helps you to really understand how this puzzle, this delusion is going on and how it's happening. And that little awareness will grow in us. The more time we spend with Mother, the more time we spend with the divine, the more detached we become from this mind, and the less interested we are in its contents. All of these things will come about naturally, because we're not building, we're returning, right? And so each little bit of awareness, each time we do the mantra, each time we watch the breath, Hafiz says in one of his poems it's like purifying water by running it through cheesecloth. That with each pass through the cheesecloth, the water is just a little bit purer. And that's how we are with each mention of the mantra, with any conscious thought of God. Each time that we bring ourselves back into the presence of the beloved, we become that much more pure. And so over time, we return to our nature. We get purified back into what we have always been. So he says, I believe one remedy for this is to confess our faults and to humble ourselves before God, to sit there before the beloved and to share the mind and its contents, all the good and the bad. I do not advise you to use a multiplicity of words in prayer. Okay, there's an interesting idea. You see, prayer is not necessarily words. Sometimes it's just sitting in the presence, just being with God. I like the idea of when God raises that little bit of bliss in the heart. Sometimes meditation is just about letting the bliss tell you of the presence of God, and just enjoy that. Enjoy being with God. There's nothing to be done. There's nothing to accomplish. There's nowhere to go. So just be with your love. Be with your ideal, and just imagine, if you see God as Mother, then imagine yourself clinging tightly to your Mother like you did as a child, burying your eyes in the crook of her arm for security and comfort, never worrying about whether Mother accepts you or not. Mother is Mother. She is always there. And so in that presence, in that practice of the presence of the Divine Mother, it's like that. Just imagine yourself carrying on your day-to-day duties in the comfort and protection of the crook of mother's arm. I have a distinct memory when I was a young child being held in my mother's arms, and she had this rather crazy paisleyed silk shirt on in my memory. And we're at the grocery store, which is on the base. My dad was in the military, and one of the men that worked with my father saw my mother and came over and started talking to her. And so my mother was introducing me to him. And I just remember the feeling of just not wanting to have anything to do with him. I don't know this strange man. I don't like him. And I still distinctly remember that feeling of turning my head away from him and into the crook of my mother's elbow and just burying my face in my mother's elbow, and how safe and far away from this man that felt to me. And so that has become a lot of the way that I view meditation, view the presence of God. It's putting the world away, like that man that I was being introduced to, and tucking your eyes into your ideal, into the bosom of your beloved, and just being in that safety, just letting that feeling of security become the focus, become the dominant feeling, that love. And then you begin to nurse that by thinking about infinite grace. Wow, this beautiful feeling backed up by an infinite grace and an infinite mercy and an infinite love and an immortal spirit. You just add these little pieces one at a time and contemplate them as you've got your face in mother's arm, and just be. You don't have to say anything. Show mother. Don't say anything to mother. If you want her to see what you're feeling, open your heart and let her look into it and see it herself. She's more aware of the contents of your suffering in your life than you are. Because of that first fact, she is the one living your life, and you are the ego taking credit for it. But she is the one living through you. She feels your pain before you do. She feels your loss before you are aware of it. And she knows your enlightenment before you have it. And she sees you that way. So we confess our faults and we sit humbly before God. I don't advise you to use a multiplicity of words. Don't put that relationship with God in the mind. Don't make it a thing that happens up here. It's here in the heart. This is where we want to sit with the divine. We don't want to be up here. All right? I do not advise you to use a multiplicity of words in prayer, many words and long discourses being often the occasions of wandering. All right? Often those thoughts with God, you start talking about the contents of your mind, and then you kind of forget you're talking to God. You start getting into the contents of your mind, and there you are in the kitchen cooking up a storm again, wondering what happened to mother. Where is she? Why is she always leaving me? Why doesn't God love me? Why am I always stuck? And it's not the truth. You've just once again gotten more interested in your mind than you were in mother and her presence. So he's saying, don't do that. Don't get caught up in the contents of your mind. If you want mother to look at something, open to her and let her see it. You don't have to describe it. You don't have to tell her. Just consciously open and let her look, let her peer in there. And that will give all of the little nuances that you wouldn't have been able to describe anyway. And it will make you aware of the intimacy of the divine, because to open your heart before the beloved like that and to feel that scrutiny, to feel that inward look is very comforting because of that divine grace, because of that divine love, and because of all that we know of God and love. It becomes a very comforting thing. And the shame goes away. It disappears, in a divine acceptance, not an acceptance of it's okay to keep those faults going, but in an acceptance that they are not you anyway. So let them fall. They'll go away. Hold yourself in prayer before God like a dumb or paralytic beggar at a rich man's gate. Let it be your business to keep your mind in the presence of God, in the presence of the Lord. Okay, now it's interesting. He says you're like a dumb and paralytic beggar. All right, why would he say that? Why would he make you a dumb and paralytic beggar at a rich man's gate? Well, you're dumb, right? So there's no talking. There's no expressing, no telling the story, no repeating your story of self to God, because that emphasizes it and then reestablishes it as your identity. So you don't want to do that. You don't want to do much talking in your prayer. You just want to be there in the presence. And a paralytic beggar, which means you can't do anything anyway. You can't move. You're not the one who's going to make your meditation better. You're not the one who's going to purify your mind. You're not the one who's going to realize God. That is all going to be done by the rich man. You're there to be in the presence of the rich man, to see the rich man as he's coming or going from his home. You see, in that way, we sit before God in an acknowledgement of our paralysis. I've been meditating for this many years, Mother, and I'm still having this problem. Yes, my child, just be with me, Don't focus on the troubles. Don't focus on the weaknesses. Don't focus on the longevities. Be with me. And that's what he says here. Hold yourself in prayer before God, right? Just hold yourself in that light, in that presence, like a dumb one. So in silence, not thinking yourself capable of cognating properly or thinking properly. And as a paralytic, so you're not the one doing the work. You're not the one carrying things around. And you're a beggar before the Lord. You're in a desperate, God is everything to you. You have nothing without that. So you sit there at the rich man's gate, waiting for the arrival of the rich man. Let it be your business. So your business is not all the stuff that's going on. Your business is to keep your mind in the presence of God. In all of its noise, in all of its churning, your business is not to get all of that under control. Your business is to keep your awareness in the presence of the beloved, no matter how noisy the mind is. Just drag it in there with you and show Mother. Sit there, just constantly be looking over your shoulder. Do you see this, Mother? Did you hear what? Did you hear what it just said? Did you see what it was just thinking about? Can you believe this? I can't believe it. I'm appalled. I'm totally with you, Mother. I think it's terrible. You should definitely do something about this, So you sit there because it is Mother's responsibility to clean up the child when it messes itself. You need to remember that. It's not your job to get yourself cleaned up and go to the Mother. She is your Mother. It is her job to clean you up. And she will do that. You sit in her presence, she will clean you up. Merely her presence is enough. Again, I find myself saying the same things over and over because they're fundamental. They are the truths we have to understand. In the light of awareness, the knots of Maya will untie themselves. In the presence of God, you will become a saint. In the presence of the beloved, you will come to your realization, because that is the very essence of holy company. Let it be your business to keep your mind in the presence of the Lord. If it sometimes wanders and withdraws itself from him, do not much disquiet yourself for that. Trouble and disquiet serve rather to distract the mind than to recollect it. You see, if you get overly worked up about your failing, you're right back into the problem because you're activating mind. You're identifying with the contents of the mind, and that's why you feel embarrassed. That's why you feel impure, because you're saying, I and the mind are one. The mind is me. I'm responsible directly for what it's thinking and what it's doing. And if you get upset, that just starts the churning even more. And it gets worse because that upsetness, that shame, is the veil then that does not allow you to draw yourself into the crook of Mother's arm, because you feel ashamed. You feel like she won't accept you. You feel like, how can I do this? How can I be this? How can this, that, and the other? But that's not the truth. That's not the reality. The reality is you and Mother are always deeply bonded. She's always closer than your own neck. She cannot go, will not go from you. If she were to go away from you, you would cease to exist immediately. The mother is always there. And it's up to us just to constantly be in her presence and keep that our focus. And don't get upset when the mind distracts us for a moment. Don't get upset when you fail. Just don't. Just quietly bring your mind right back again to mother and keep going. Don't get caught up in your problem, what you think is your problem. Do not much disquiet yourself for that. Trouble and disquiet serve rather to distract the mind than to recollect it. The will must bring it back in tranquility, right? So just calmly, nicely, respectfully, you bring the mind back to the mother. No harshness, no words, no frustration, no anger, none of those things. Just steadily and tranquilly bring it back to the feet of mother. No explanation necessary, no apology necessary. Just bring it back. The will must bring it back in tranquility. If you persevere in this manner, God will have pity on you. God will respond. That presence of the divine will become apparent to you. That wonderful bliss of the presence does not ever go away. It's always just a matter of you being quiet enough to enjoy it, right? So we're training ourselves to be quiet enough to enjoy the bliss of the presence of our beloved, of the divine. And that's all. When you get caught in the mind, just come back. When you get distracted, just come back. When you get tied up in your vices, just come back. Come back, come back, come back, and try, like Brother Lawrence, to come to the place where it's just steadily always there and just always in the presence. One way to recollect the mind easily in the time of prayer and preserve it more in tranquility is not to let it wander too far at other times. You should keep it strictly in the presence of God. And being accustomed to think of him often, you will find it easy to keep your mind calm in the time of prayer, or at least to recall it from its wanderings. So you see here, he's really bringing about the fact that our practice and our life are one. That we don't just practice in the morning and the evening. That's our intensity. That's when we do our intensity, our intensive. But that is to prepare the mind for the whole day. That period of time in the morning is just a time to get it set, to stay in that mindset, to stay in that awareness through the whole day. And so all of our little rules of engagement through the day are to keep our minds on God, right? So the reason you take off your shoes before you go in the kitchen, again, not because God cares about shoes in the kitchen. He never was that petty. But by you associating no shoes in the kitchen, you associate mind with God. By not tasting the food that you're going to offer, by offering the food. You see, all of these thousands of little rules, they're not important in and of themselves. God does not care one whit whether you taste your lasagna ahead of time or not. What he cares about is whether you're doing it in the presence of the beloved, in the presence of the divine. So all of these rules are for an exercise to kind of nudge us into awareness, to do everything in the presence of God, to do everything with God beside us, in us, of us. So all those things. And so it's always good. Make up more rules. I can't. Anyway, that's right. That not having grown up around Indian culture at all, when I first got into the monastery, oh my gosh, I couldn't imagine so many rules. I remember one time opening the fridge and to get stuff out to make lunch, and I had both my hands full of vegetables, and Swami was standing there, And the vegetable, I tried to close the refrigerator door, and the vegetable drawer wasn't all the way closed, so it wouldn't close. So I opened the door and I kicked the drawer shut with my foot. I might as well have kicked Swami in the side of the head with the way he looked at me. He was like, "Oh, what are you doing? You should not touch your foot in the refrigerator." Like, what? I can't put my foot in the refrigerator. I got to close the drawer. And I all of those rules piled up in the kitchen. It's like I can only, the first time I cooked lunch in Hollywood, because they have a pure kitchen, because they cook for the shrine every day. Oh my God, poor Shiva. I'd never heard somebody chant so loud and so often in my life as he followed me around the kitchen as I put one knife after another on the wrong counter, or picked up the wrong bowl to cook the mashed potatoes and all of that. So I saw all these rules and I couldn't understand, where are all these rules coming from? Why are they here like this? And then I understood. These rules are here only to keep your mind on God, to make you conscious of what you're doing, to make you pay attention to what you're doing, to make you meticulously present in what you're doing. So the practice of the presence of God, from that tradition, is tied to all of those rules of living. They're there not because those rules are meaningful. They're not. I'm sure of it. The spinner of the universe is not caring about what the dust is doing on the different planets. It's not what it's about. But he does care about the presence of love and the awareness of love and the awareness of relationship, And so all of those rules and all of those techniques, plus all the ones that you create for yourself in order to keep your mind on the presence of God. I remember my friend Jackie Bender, when she was trying to quit smoking, she put a big fat rubber band around her wrist. It was terrible to watch. And every time she thought about having a cigarette, she would pull that big thing out, snap it right back on her wrist. At the end of the day, her wrist was just bright red because she had smacked that rubber band. But that was her technique for avoiding the thought of having a cigarette. And so in that same way, come up with practices and techniques that will keep your mind in the presence of God all day long, whatever they are, however you do that. It's all up to you. And they can be playful, they can be joyful, they can be serious, they can be whatever they need to be. But always keep your mind in the presence of God. And don't let it wander too far at any time, whether you're in meditation and prayer or not, So come up with ways of doing that. I can remember thinking that I always thought of God. I remember in the late 90s, before I joined the monastery, I was doing jopam and I was doing my practices. And I kind of had this idea that I always thought of God. And so I decided that I would make it my practice at work that every hour on the hour, I probably told this story 1,000 times, but every hour on the hour, I would pray for 15 seconds or something. And I made it a rule that one knee had to touch the ground, and that I couldn't miss this during the 8 hours of work every day. On the hour, every hour, I had to pray with one knee on the floor. And I can remember being in the conference room with a conference meeting going on, and that hour hand would hit that minute, and I'd have to slide over, get half my leg off the chair, and I'd slip that one knee down onto the floor next to the chair, and I'd hold my hands together and I'd pray my 2 lines of prayer and slip back over, get comfortable. And doing that practice just for a week, I realized I never thought of God, because that hour, every time it came, it seemed like, oh my God, it's already time again. You don't have to do it. But doing that, I realized for the rest of that hour, I hadn't had a single thought about God. So it made me aware of how much my mind wandered, which was very important, because it's very unhealthy to get a higher idea of yourself than what you are. That's one of the big problems in spiritual life, is we get this idea that we're something. That's the nature of the ego. It's always piling up favors for itself that it doesn't deserve to have, that are not healthy for it to have. And so these practices, being in the presence of God, keeps us humble, right? Keeps us humble because we become aware And this is part of the difficulty. It's part of the reason we don't like to meditate. It's part of the reason we don't like prayer, is because it makes us face what we really are. It makes us see ourselves as we really are. And that often is not a pretty sight. But then it also reminds us of that part of us that's divine, that image of the beloved that is our true nature. And we have to know that, because when we separate from mind, that's where we stand. We stand in our perfection. We stand in grace. We stand whole and complete and full. And so when we move out of the mind, out of the world of the changing, off of the sand, the wise man not building our life on the sand, not building our life on the changing thought, the changing mind, the changing world, but to build our house on the rock. And what is the rock? The rock is that unchanging self within, deep within, that part of you that's never changed, that does not, is unaffected by the changing world. We have to move our awareness from the changing into that unchanging. So one way to recollect the mind easily in the time of prayer and preserve it more in tranquility is to not let it wander too far at other times. You should keep it strictly in the presence of God, and being accustomed to think of him often, you will find it easy to keep your mind calm in the time of prayer, or at least to recall it from its wanderings, right? So if we get in that habit, that's what all of this is about, creating habits. The mind is just a bundle of habits. Your personality is just a bundle of habits. Your character is a bundle of habits, a bundle of good habits to the degree that they're good habits. I have told you already at large in my former letters of the advantages we may draw from this practice of the presence of God. Let us set about it seriously. Let us set about this seriously and pray for one another. Beautiful way to end it, so that we don't become selfish. We don't become self-consumed. Part of that recollection of God is the recollection of everyone's need for the beloved. And so we give our time and our heart to others also, and pray for their remembrance of God, pray for their strength of God, and even to go even farther than that, make it part of your practice to be the reason people think about God, to be consciously aware when you're in the kitchen cooking puja food. Don't go talking about the prices of the vegetables. Don't go beat the brahmachari for putting the onion on the wrong counter. Instead, be the one who's drawing everyone's mind back to the feet of God, singing a song, complimenting somebody on how well they're cutting the vegetables for Thakur, all of those things, chanting a chant, reciting a poem, telling a spiritual joke. Actually, it doesn't even have to be spiritual. We have permission from Thakur to tell rather saucy jokes in the presence of God. So, be yourself. Don't be pretentious, but be your goofy self in a way that brings people's mind to God. That's the way to do that, Don't pretend. Don't pretend to be holy, but just tell people you're not holy and bring your mind to God that way. Be honest, but always make sure that you stumble and make your mistakes right there in front of the divine. There's no other place, and that presence will eventually bring you out and everyone with you. All right, that's the end of that letter, and it's 3 minutes to 8. Anybody have a question or a insight? It's so beautiful. That notion I remember telling somebody came to me and complained about a particular recurring problem they were having. And I said, you have to take mother into your vice with you. If you've got some terrible habit, usually what we do is we stop thinking about God. We push God out of our mind and go indulge in our bad habit and then come back and apologize. because we have to drive ourselves into unconsciousness to engage in vice, because that's what's required. But if you take mother with you, right? That's what Ramakrishna was telling Girish. When you pick up that glass of wine, he told him, think of mother. Thank her for the bliss you're going to enjoy from drinking this glass of wine, and offer it to her, and then drink your wine. A very startling teaching there. You know, he didn't tell him to stop indulging in his vice. He told him to bring consciousness into your vice. And he knew by bringing consciousness, by bringing mother, by bringing awareness into your vice, the vice is going to run away. The vice hates that. So bring mother into your darkest, deepest, most private places. Bring her there. Be aware that she's watching you. Be aware that she's feeling what you're feeling. Be aware that she's seeing what you're seeing. You know, and little by little like that, you'll become so uncomfortable by the presence of your own vices that you yourself will push them out, because the presence of God is what gives you bliss. And your vices always ruin the present for you. They ruin the moment, always. They always require unconsciousness, you know. And so fight that by being in the presence. All right. It's lovely looking at you. So spread the word around about the class so that I can, actually most people are here. You're all DC people, and Kamala, you're an independent. Wonderful. All right. Jai Ma.
Thank you, Maharaj.